Hello, welcome to our Expository Text Structures review for English 101. This will give you an overview of the expository text structures, writing strategies for expository writing, and look at how the expository thesis is different than our typical narrative thesis that we have been looking at. So the purpose of expository writing is to explain or inform. It demonstrates things for us. So we start with a concept and then we slowly explain that concept with specific examples and analysis. Just because we're leaving narrative structure behind does not mean that we've left narration or that story structure in the past. We're now going to use this to help show the audience the example. Keep in mind, it does not persuade, it does not develop an argument. Not yet, we're not doing that yet. Expository writing has 5 substructures. You may not realize that you know them already, but I'm guessing that you've most likely had encounters with these in some form. So for example, Venn diagram, we all had that in elementary school, so you're thinking, compare, contrast. Purpose behind this is we show similarities among concepts. We also show differences among concepts. We can start with a familiar topic, something that the audience knows, for example, and then show the relation to the unfamiliar to help explain that concept. We move on to the differences to help explain how the topic is unique. So if you're looking for this and saying, is this compare contrast, look for 2 topics. Technical or process explains the steps necessary to complete a process. It may include things like recipes, diagrams, or instructions. Usually it does not follow traditional paragraph structure. We might have things like numbered steps, bullet points, or something starting with how to blank. Definition, your own. No dictionary definitions allowed. You cannot use dictionary definitions in expository writing. We'll explain that here in just a bit. Purpose behind definition writing is to explain an abstract concept, one that we cannot access through our senses. So you might remember our senses are taste, touch, hear, smell, taste, touch, hear, smell, and see. Sorry, kind of ironic there. So for example, how does one define concepts like love or justice or family? How would you show justice to someone through concrete examples and analysis? So we're going to focus on a single concept, and then we'd establish criteria, and then explain the concept by analyzing examples that meet that criteria. That will actually be the focus for your first essay coming up in this unit. So why can't we use dictionary definitions? I always have students ask this. First thing is, they're somebody else's words. They're somebody else's criteria. It's not yours. It's also a very lazy way of defining a concept. Establishing our own criteria and analysis of unique examples creates a much stronger essay. Also consider that dictionaries are just snapshots in time. They show us the denotation or the book definition. They rarely encompass all uses of the word. We want the connotative definition, that is, the living definition of the word as it's used in context or conversation. So keep in mind, for example, that the first English dictionaries were not published until the early 1600s. By that time, Shakespeare had already written all of his plays and sonnets, for example. So dictionaries are usually running behind language, trying to map it out after it's already been developed. They are not the final source of any sort of definition. The connotation, therefore, is more credible than the denotation because, well, it came first, and it lives and grows with the language usage. So we want a living definition. That's why we can't use dictionary definitions. Another substructure that you're probably familiar with, the problem-solution structure. It defines the problem, proposes possible solutions. We explain the consequences of the possible solutions, but notice we're not arguing about it just yet. Next one, cause and effect. We explain why or how an event occurred. Your history classes, sociology, it's very common for cause and effect. We identify and analyze the consequences of an event. What were the effects of World War I, for example? We may focus on just one or the other. We don't have to do both within the same essay, depending upon what our focus and our purpose is for writing. So, for example, what were the causes of the U.S. Civil War? What are the outcomes of reducing calories and exercising more? We're still just explaining. We're not arguing. We don't put our bias into this just yet. Now keep in mind these structures often work together. I know we're separating them out, but typically they're not so well defined as a separate text structure. So a sample expository essay might work a lot like this. We might define a problem. We might explain the causes of the problem. We might explain the effects that make it a problem. We could compare the problem to others like it. We could share the contrast to explain why it is unique. Then we could explain a process and show steps that may lead to the solution of the problem. So notice all 5 structures are in place and are in use here. This, by the way, is how you also turn a 2-page essay into a 5-page essay. If we're looking at an essay using all of these structures, there's no way that we could do this in just 2 or 3 pages. This is at least a 5 to 7-page structure here, possibly even 7 to 10. When we use expository writing, we're going to use what we call the funnel introduction method. Now, funnel, think visually. We're going to start off very broadly. We're going to establish background or context for the audience. It's typically about 3 sentences. Then we narrow the focus to your perspective on the topic. It's about 2 sentences. We'll preview the main points, 2 to 3 sentences or so. And then finally we wrap up with the thesis. So again, notice how we start off broadly and then it becomes more and more specific. So there we have that nice visual of the funnel. The thesis is typically the last sentence of the introduction. And remember, the purpose of the thesis is to establish and set a purpose for the essay. So our expository thesis standards, whichever prompt you receive for the essay, first thing it should answer the prompt. Justifies discussion, meaning that, hey, this is actually worth talking about. This is something that we should consider. Focuses on a specific idea. It's going to be really tempting to want to use plurals in the thesis, just so perhaps you can develop the essay more. But the thesis needs to be as focused as possible. So no plurals in the thesis. We also have to be sarcastic sometimes with our thesis. We have to say, hey, so what? Why does this matter? So somewhere, and typically within the introduction, within that funnel introduction, not just the thesis itself, but we're going to see the justification and that so what together, hopefully within the background and the context. It sets up an expository purpose, focusing on one of those 5 structures that we just identified. It does not set up a story or a narrative. There should be no first person in the thesis or in your topic sentences. It does not set up an argument. It does not contain plurals. So your strategies then moving forward for successful expository writing, keep the voice objective. We're not arguing, we're not persuading, we're just informing. Develop your own point of view through the use of examples and analysis. Consider those aspects of presence. Nobody else is going to have your unique perspective. No one else is going to have your background experience, and therefore your background experience is also going to inform the selection of evidence that you bring to your essay. Do not use dictionary definitions. Avoid cliches or safe topics. Develop a perspective that is unique to you. Each paragraph should contain a specific example that supports the purpose of the essay. We'll see some examples as we move forward here. Paragraphs should focus on an analysis of how the example supports that purpose. Last thing, your words, your experience, your analysis. There is no research necessary, nor is it required at this time. In fact, I'd like you to avoid doing research until we get into our specific methods for conducting it. That's all for now for expository writing. Please email me if you have any questions.